Hi, VHB17 here, and welcome to my part 1 of a 4-part series of my trip from Canberra to Tromso in Norway, the places that we visited in between, the aircraft we flew on, the aircraft I saw, and the cyclone that almost brought it to a halt before we even left the ground. The aircraft that you just saw was the Lockheed Hudson that is in the main entrance of the Canberra airport. There are very few of these in the world remaining today, and only one of them is actually flying, which was this example here from the Temora Aviation Museum, which I photographed a few years ago, but just putting it here just so that you get an idea of what this aircraft is all about. And just to show off, I did actually get to fly in this aircraft quite a few times, and here's a shot here of me in the ball turret at the back of the aircraft, flying around Temora, shooting forward. Virgin Australia's Boeing 737 was our first flight from Canberra to Brisbane. We also got to see this QantasLink Boeing 717, which has been recently retired from the fleet. An interesting feature of Canberra Airport is walking on the floor. You have these glass perspex floor panels where you can look down and actually watch your luggage being transported to wherever it goes to get loaded onto the aircraft. Boarding is always fun. And as this is the very first flight on our very first leg of a very long series of flights over 2 months, fun. Pushing back and a very complimentary welcome on board from the captain before we got a bit of a rude awakening.
My name is Lawrence. I'd like to introduce you to the rest of the team in the flight deck is Captain Robert Moulton and First Officer Brian McGill. Your crew in the cabin today are Craig.
And there it is, the competing airlines aircraft blocking the taxiway, forcing us to actually backtrack down the runway for our departure. And there he is still on the taxiway as we are backtracking down the runway. As this is our first takeoff in one of many over the next 2 months, I'm going to include the full takeoff roll here, but if you wanted to fast forward, go to the 3-minute 10-second mark and avoid it, just in case you didn't want to watch it. By the way, you're not getting the scenic view of Canberra as we take off, but you do get to see the old RAAF base at Fairburn there, including the hangar that I used to work in. I have always loved the purple lighting on board these Virgin aircraft. Never ever ceases to bore me. The coffee, never good. Never ever good, but if you read the cups you can sometimes get a good chuckle out of it. I kind of did on this particular one. Safely in Brisbane. Took a little opportunity to walk around and get videos of the Alliance and the Virgin aircraft that were outside the terminal. As we were in the Virgin terminal, we didn't get to see much else. But had an extra hour to kill as we got delayed, our very first delay on our flight. Only an hour, but we managed to survive it okay. Still a little bit concerned about the cyclone that was heading towards Cairns, but it was still a few days away, and we had still a few days to go before we boarded our flight for our trip to Japan. But we were hopeful that everything would fall in place and our trip would proceed as planned. So apparently Queensland's not as well equipped as other parts of the country. Bear in mind, one of the hottest states, you still have to board sometimes from the rear entrance. But once on board, air-conditioned flight, heading north towards Cairns, smooth sailing from here. Still concerned about that cyclone. Still, fingers crossed, arrived safely at Cairns. Obligatory shot of the aircraft as we vacated, followed by the Bristol Belfast off in the distance, one of the only one or two, I think 2 remaining in the world today. Check me if I'm wrong, but got the shot of that. Love these road signs just outside the terminal at Cairns. named after various aeroplanes with their little pictures on the street sign. Safely booked into our hotel in Cairns, looking out over towards the ocean to see if we can see any signs of the cyclone. So far, nothing. All good. Went to have some food. Apparently it's crap. But my wife found this pancake place that suited her dietary requirements. Oh, and by the way, it's almost Christmas time. Can you tell the telltale signs? Walking around the Cairns Esplanade area, there's a lot of interesting artwork. Let's just call it that for artwork's sake. Grey clouds in the distance, starting to be of a concern. Apparently the cyclone's still a couple of days away, if that, but them grey clouds making me wonder. Our flight is still a couple of days away to Japan, so we spent a bit of time doing the touristy thing. Found a bad fishy, found a rainbow, oh, and you gotta see this. Rain. Tourist attraction. Got to do it. Everybody does it. So some fishies there and a big fishy there and a boat going backwards. Interesting. Always thought Queensland was a bit of a backward state. That's an end joke. I've used to live in Queensland, so I'm allowed to say it. But when you actually see a boat reversing, and naturally it's reversing because, you know, it's the easiest way out, but what skills that must take. Well, I won't say skills because, you know, it's just reversing. But you want to make sure there's nothing behind you when you're doing that. And he seems to be doing it at a great rate of knots as well. I was mesmerised by this, hence why you're getting to see all of it. Sorry about that. A slow speed collision with tortoises, which would look like this if it happened in real life. And a nighttime view of the casino and the Hilton Hotel where the helicopter just recently flew into and crashed, killing the pilot. Nightlife in Cairns, buzzing. Stinking bloody hot, but buzzing. Last look at the foyer before we headed off to the aquarium, where I got eyeballed by fish and found out that crabs climb trees. Who knew? Oh, and then I got a warm embrace by a lobster. Seriously, would have if I was in the water. Kitchy kitchy goo. And jellyfish. Mesmerised by these things, I could watch them for hours. Hours and hours and hours. For those of you who like sharks and stingrays, saw them too. Even got to watch a stingray fart. And sharing it with you guys. After the museum, we headed back to the Esplanade for lunch. Got to watch a couple of helicopters coming and going. Always fun. Next day, we arrived at the airport to catch our Virgin 737-800 MAX aircraft to Japan, and that's it. Note the blue sky in the background there. We were going to make it safely out of Cairns. However, the cyclone, as you can see in this shot, was very, very close. It actually closed the day after we left. And this is our flight radar track showing how far we had got and how close the cyclone was to Cairns, which when it hit, flooded the airport out. It was closed for, I think, days, maybe up to a week. I can't remember now, but somebody can remind me on that in the comments for sure. We did book extra leg room even though we're in economy, just for a little bit of comfort on the trip. Attempted the obligatory bad cup of coffee. It was free. What can I say? I also wasn't overly impressed with the in-flight food, mainly because for an international flight we had to actually pay for it. Put me off a little bit. Maybe my judgment was clouded, but annoyed. But I did enjoy the view from the window of the 737 MAX as we transitioned from daytime into sunset, into darkness. It was just awesome. Believe it or not, this was the only shot I got when we arrived in Japan. Nothing. Not even in focus. Had to wait till the next morning before I got anything decent. Our first full day in Japan, we walked around the local streets and we came across these canals. I didn't realise that the canals were so abundant in Japan at the time, but we did get to watch them cleaning it, and I could have sat down and watched these guys work for hours. But I didn't. But I still stopped long enough to take a video of it. Later we came across this blue bridge which we stopped to take a photograph of, and then I stopped to take a photograph of my wife and daughter taking a photograph of, and then to promptly walk across the bridge. We were headed towards Tokyo Station, just a tourist place that I wanted to visit. Never been there before, so now was the time. And finally we got here, but I was so stuffed by the time we got here that we literally had to get public transport all the way back to our accommodation. The trip was planned to walk there and walk back, but oh my god, I'm too old for this. As I found out further throughout the trip, I'm just not up to it anymore. The next day we caught a bus to Tokyo Small Worlds, a place that I had on my bucket list for a very, very long time, mainly because it has this scale, well, I don't know what scale it is, but it's a full working replica of Cairns Airport, including terminal, and I could have spent all day here. This is when you regret taking your wife and daughter on holidays with you. They want to do other things. So I spent a good hour or so in this part of the airport, part of the building, watching and filming all this attraction, while my wife and daughter went and visited the rest of the other attractions throughout the building. As you sit and watch this display, it changes from daytime to nighttime, from winter to summer, as you'll see throughout this clip. Every so often you'll see an aircraft come off its tracks. Somebody will have to walk out and pick them up and put them back on. Take note of the backdrop there, beautiful blue day. And if you pick a time that's not as crowded as I was, you can actually walk down the length of the display and follow the aircraft. I gather if it was a busy day you wouldn't be able to do that because you would just be taking out people along the way. Notice how the background has changed now to the nighttime view as we come in for the nighttime landing. Seriously, I could have spent hours and hours and hours just watching this stuff. Again, tracking the aircraft with no crowd, fun as. Here's the replica of the Cairns Airport as I was telling you about. For those of you who've been there, you'll recognise it. It's just mind-blowing awesome. Even has its own moving vehicles. That came as a surprise when it happened. If there's one downside to this, I would say that not all the aircraft are in airline livery colours. As you see, most of them are Tokyo Small Words livery, but when you see the ones from Malaysian Airlines, it just makes it punch out. There's a British Airways one in the background there. Oh, and a train. That snuck up on me. Didn't see that coming. And there's that snowing backdrop. Guess it's winter now. 4 seasons in one day. If you're willing to fight any claustrophobic fears, you can crawl through a very tiny narrow passageway to position yourself in the middle of the runway area to get shots like this. There's also a number of other displays that you can also visit, including this futuristic style city. As well as this dragon-y type of scenario. For the train lovers, there's more than enough to keep you amused all day as well. Even got to see a Saturn rocket launch. Next day we visited Disney Sea. Too overcrowded for me, but I got to see this biplane from Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think it might be a Boeing Stearman, but something about it just looks a little bit off. Got to see a boat, something that looked like a boat, a bigger boat, and cars. This little train was fun to ride, but Jesus, it was one of the shortest tracks that I've ever had from point A to point B. And you couldn't go backwards, you had to get off every time you got to the different location. The burning waterfall was very impressive, particularly at night. And then on the way out, the floating earth on a ball of water. It's also where I spent a lot of time waiting for my wife and daughter, who decided that after a hard day walking around in the sun, needed to go do some shopping at the souvenir shops before we left. Next day we found a cat cafe, which we spent a good hour or so inside, soaking up the local pussycats. This part of town was obviously very high with anime tourists, so I lost my daughter here for a long time. But I did come across this live action photo shoot, which I decided I was going to help embarrass the poor young lady. Not intentionally, of course, but apparently I did. Later that evening we headed off to what we thought was a Christmas market. Well, it kind of wasn't. Found a Christmas tree, but that was pretty much it. But this should give you an idea of where we were close to at that time. Anyway, that was a big day, so we caught the train back for the next morning, where we were headed off to Shibuya. We did, however, come across this location, which we referred to as the English town of Japan. Just out of place spot in the middle of, well, you're just not expecting it. So there you go. Walking across Shibuya crossing for the very first time was everything I expected it to be. Rushed. This statue of the most loyal dog in Japan is heartbreaking. This dog returned to this station for 9 years waiting for its owner to return. Unfortunately, that was never going to happen, as the owner had died 9 years ago. The police cars in Japan are pretty interesting. Okay, so I think that's enough aircraft ramp action for this video, which brings this conclusion of the first of 4 videos of this trip to an end. If you would like to be notified of the next one when it's available, just hit subscribe so that you get notification when it appears. Thanks very much for your time. Have a great day.